so what I'm doing in Bristol is head of chaplaincy. So I have a very large multi-faith team. And so I've just launched this last year. It's a new sort of area of chaplaincy. It's the first prison that's doing this in the whole of the UK, and we call it eco-chaplaincy. So
I love it.
So now we're reaching out to deliver courses with your Christian, Hindu, Buddhist, Muslim. We're delivering courses on eco-psychology, ecotherapy. So those sisters that have violent thoughts or self-harm, we have beehives, we have a therapy garden, and so I sort of have a course which I then say to my Christian chaplain or my Buddhist or Hindu, now that's the template. Now you can change it and alter it to put your own scripture perspective.
Wonderful.
And then so we are the first pilot prison now in the whole of the UK that's now doing that.
Really? And where can I see that written up so we can introduce it to others?
I'll get that sent off to you. I just wanted to really let you know what I'm trying to do to support you really in your organization. So I've been, my sort of background is I've sort of been connected with the natural world all my life as a biologist and ecologist. And so I've always wanted to reach out to the Muslim world to try and educate them, because when you look at our scripture, it's so full of what you talk about. But sadly, and it is sadly that many Muslims today in the world have lost that connection. So they only understand sort of the do's and the don'ts, but they don't understand that deep inner dimension. So that's what I've been trying to do. So I set up, it's just like a movement really. It's small, it's called Heart Seed, because to try and stir that heart. And when you look at it, just like what you say, it's I call it a crisis of perception of how we see the world. So if you look at an environmental, a social, educational, a political, these are symptoms, I feel, of something even greater, which is a crisis of how we see the world. That I'm due to have and I think you've had a interview with him, with Dr. Ian McGilchrist.
Yes.
So we are due to have a webinar soon, because he also says it's a crisis of perception. So, you know, we're seeing the world predominantly through the left brain hemisphere and not the right brain hemisphere, and which is absolutely amazing, because that's what our scripture says. And it goes back to the very beginning, when the prophet was in the cave and he couldn't read or write. And the first revelation came down, which was to read. But when you sit down with the scholars, what they try to say is, this is my sort of launch pad, is, okay, for the next 23 years that the revelation will come down, and you've been studying and contemplating nature, because behind nature is the creator, and that is a book of nature to be read. So you've now got to bring that book of nature, which is all your science, etc., and social sciences, and connect that to the revelation and show humanity that everything is interconnected. So that's my sort of foundation, and that's how I sort of launch that. And there's so many examples in our scripture that deal with this, that everything is not isolated, everything is connected. And particularly what you focus on, which is the real crisis, is the economic system. And, you know, although the religion of Islam is under pressure to change and adapt, and obviously it can to a certain extent, what it won't do is to go against what we say is like a divine rule about global interest, because that's what's caused all the injustice and the corruption. And so I try and talk about that. And then if you, in my job, I mean, if you sat down with a rabbi, you sat down with an Orthodox Christian scholar, we would all agree from a Abrahamic religious tradition that we are, what we say is we are in the end of times, and you've just got to look at all the global issues. And you see so many people now doing mass urbanization, moving into the cities. So what we are saying is, don't follow the herd. Go in the opposite direction, and where you can, try and set up like an eco village or a self-sustainable village. Go off grid as much as you can. But sadly, for many people, they're so embedded that it's difficult. So I'm also a permaculturist as well, and food forest. So I'm trying to reach out to the Muslim world to say, okay, well, look, if you can't leave and go into the countryside, then let's work together to see what we can do in your back garden, in an orchard, and try and expand that out to produce your food, to become self-sufficient in your local community. So that's where I'm sort of coming from. And I remember you wrote, which was beautiful, when you look at the negative side of our religion, which is those individuals who are extremists. And part of my job is to work with individuals like that. And there's two things there, because they've taken scripture out of context, which is wrong. But I agree with you, a lot of behind all this has nothing to do with religion. It's to do with injustice, it's to do with water, it's to do with food, it's to do with corruption. So, but I just want to, I mean, we're in the early days really, and I don't know of many Muslim, sort of organizations that are trying to do what you're doing. So I just wanted to take the opportunity to say thank you, and to let you know that in some small capacity, I'm trying to, do what I can.
It's wonderful, wonderful to hear that. The direction that the global economy has taken the world from the inception of the modern economic system has been to create this dependence on global trade and global traders. And that's what's created blindness and an inhuman system, a system where we just don't have the overview. And so the movement back towards rebuilding systems to essentially to exploit nature and other people to meet our needs. When we eat, when we wear clothes, when we use nature, we are making use of this living fabric, and we need to do that as intelligently and responsibly as possible. And so I don't know if you've read my book, Ancient Futures. Have you? Oh, good. Well, because, my conclusion after 16 years of seeing this remarkable, situation, which is what made me very passionate, because it was so clear that this overall techno-economic system founded in reductionist science, founded in a science for profit, that blind, narrow specialization linked to profit was fatal, and that we needed to be moving in the opposite direction. I had relationships with several interdisciplinary departments and with thoughtful people who were realizing that we must move towards this more holistic approach if we want to have a chance of understanding the living world, and which of course has to do with the balance of the two brain hemispheres. More recently, I started understanding also how it is that in engaging in food production, we are engaging in a way that we simply don't with forestry, for instance. Very often when people first get interested in climate and nature, they think plant trees, plant trees, plant trees. But planting a tree is something that you might do once in a lifetime, or even, several times. But with the whole food system, there is a need for an ongoing engagement. And that ongoing engagement is really what we evolved with. As we've evolved as human beings, the majority of people were involved in the gathering, the hunting, the growing, the processing, and the eating and sharing together. It's a much more fundamental need and way of becoming human connected to the living world in a humble and practical way. The focus would be on the production side, but not this understanding of how the market influences the growing, how it influences society. And so the idea of really looking at how do you link producers and consumers, how do we actually work against this tidal wave in the opposite direction? It's been very hard to find allies with clarity. And now, after COVID, there are groups springing up that are so suspicious of government and so suspicious of the UN and what they call the globalists, that this can be helpful, but they're often quite naive, and they're often just pointing to particular people like Klaus Schwab and Bill Gates. They don't have a historical perspective, and they don't have the spiritual foundations that we're talking about, the understanding that all of life is interconnected, and that every spiritual tradition really, in one way or another, has pointed in that direction. But before the organized major religions, the monotheistic religions, indigenous peoples around the world and these more female-led cultures were deeply engaged with the spiritual truth and reality of nature and nature-based living. And they were, of course, marginalized in this more patriarchal system. But then the problem we have now is that, this system has developed into something that is essentially run by algorithms.
Yes, it's just interesting when you mentioned on the feminine side, because in the Muslim world, we've just celebrated Hajj, where they go to Mecca, and very few people know that all of the key sites where you have to go to perform Hajj, which is where Abraham went to as well, are all feminine names.
Really? No, I didn't know that.
Yeah. So if you look at the Quran, it has a mixture of masculine and feminine, but all of the key sites that you have to go to fulfill Hajj is all feminine names. So, a lot of the really deep scholars, they say that it's basically it's the human returning back to the mother's womb.
Yeah. When did you become Muslim, and how?
Well, so I spent most of my life researching birds of prey. And I was called out then to I got a call from the chief bird ecologist in Saudi Arabia back in 1998 to say that there was a problem there with lots of different species of birds of prey. So I went there and I got funded by British Aerospace and everything, and I was there doing research in a colony in the mountains.
So why British Aerospace for that?
I don't know, because they needed to get me some funding, so they had some sort of, I don't know.
In Saudi Arabia.
Yes, yeah. So although I was flying Saudi Arabian Airlines, it was all funded by. But anyway, then in the mountains 8,000 feet up, then for me, I'm just writing a book at the moment, but it was a spiritual connection because I heard the call to prayer. So I became Muslim there, came back, and then had that desire to study. And
Huh.
being ignorant, I thought then that the scholars would send me back there, to a Middle East country. But they said, no, we're going to send you to South Africa. And I thought, South Africa? But they were trying to connect with me because they knew my love with nature and the Kruger. And so I went to study there at a very large.
Sorry, but who is it who sent you to South Africa?
So I came back here to Gloucester, and
Yeah.
I spoke to all of the local scholars here, and
Yeah.
I had a
To
place.
you mean the local Muslim scholars or academic scholars?
Muslim.
But before that, you were not Muslim, and you were connected to, what were you connected to as a someone who studied birds of prey?
Yes, so I was primarily a Raptor biologist. So I studied through the University of Wales in Swansea. So I was doing my MPhil in Saudi Arabia.
See.
Yes.
Oh, I see.
So I was looking at the persecution of this particular species of vulture.
Uh-huh. Yeah.
Yeah. And so we were looking at, they asked me to look at, is it declining because of pesticides, human disturbance?
Yeah.
So I was, and apart from there, I was also lecturing in animal care colleges here. I was teaching farming, biology, ecology. So I was a lecturer in all of the key sort of land-based colleges around Herefordshire, Worcestershire, Gloucestershire. And my history is I was head of education for a number of zoos and wildlife parks, and I've set up curriculums all over the world for children.
Really? And were you, when you were working with those organizations, were you then trying to promote genuinely organic?
Yes, yeah. And it wasn't until after I embraced Islam, and then I then said to the teachers here, I wanted to become an imam. I wanted to become a scholar. So I had to go away and study for nearly 6 years.
Really?
And it wasn't till I'm starting to learn the Arabic and all of the the laws that I was amazed how the Quran continually talks about nature. And since that day, I've been trying to reach out to the Muslim world, including many scholars, to try and say to them, why are we not teaching this?
Yeah. But in a way, it doesn't surprise me. In all my work, what I'm finding is that the people that have a deeper understanding are people who have lived in the Western industrial urban reality and had an experience of cultures or ways of life that weren't quite so urbanized or industrialized. And so that's where there are some people who come from India, like Vandana Shiva, who's lived and studied in the West. But, it's from that experience that usually the wisdom grows, because we need that critique of the dominant system with clarity. Yeah. And unfortunately, many people in Saudi Arabia and in Pakistan, many of the Muslims I know, are still fallible, are still weak in terms of the seduction and the huge psychological pressures that make people feel backward and primitive.
Yes.
Yes.
What's interesting is that I would say the majority of people that follow me who are Muslim are actually mums. Yes, and they are the ones that want, in the majority of cases, they are trying to homeschool their children. So they have this inner connection.
Yes, yes, that's very interesting. And you're talking about mums in England?
No, in England.
Really?
No, my platform is global.
But so how many countries? From how many countries?
At the moment, throughout the Middle East, we've got Bangladesh, India, America, Lebanon, Canada, the UK, really? Norway. They're just coming.
And when you say your platform, does that mean How often do you communicate with them, and how?
Every day. So we do
Every day.
every day. So I have a Heartseed channel on YouTube, and then I have one that deals with how to engage with nature. I've just opened one called the Polymath, because I'm trying to get youngsters to think and study like a polymath.
Well,
So,
and what do you mean? What do you mean by that? What do you mean by polymath?
because if you look at the education system and the business world, everything is specialized. So again, that
Yeah.
connects you to the left brain hemisphere.
Yeah.
Whereas if you look back at the Islamic civilizations of Baghdad in Spain, the scholars weren't just scholars of Islamic sciences, but they were scholars of biology, science, chemistry, physics. So they looked at everything in a holistic perspective.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I think I'm just slightly worried, when you say polymath, it's just, again, the word math, because what I've also, what became very clear to me was that the problems start already by starting to read far too early, and that the hand-eye coordination, the embodied engagement with life, actually growing up, learning how to tend to particular plants and animals and to care for them and to use your senses and the feel and touch and the engagement, the face-to-face engagement is the the experiential knowledge that we need in order to engage in a genuinely compassionate and wise way with life. So, and definitely the specialized intellectual approach. But when you say polymath, it still sounds a bit intellectualized. And I would say the same thing to Ian. And I think that a lot of the women who respond to you are responding because they've tended not to become so pulled into, of course, our two brain halves are more connected as women. And then as mothers, there is that deeper engagement, that embodied engagement with life that is quite different from men. So it's wonderful. I'm really glad to hear that. And yet, what I'm finding is that there are very few women who have enough interest or even capacity to look intellectually at the dominant system, at this patriarchal system, and to critique it in a holistic, articulate way. So most of my colleagues are men, and a very large proportion are white men. It's very paradoxical. There's someone named Camila Moreno, who's a Brazilian woman, incredibly educated. She has about at least 3 PhDs, I think, but she's been attending all the climate negotiations, summits over the last 11 years, and has been very aware that they've been run by corporate interests, and that from A to Z, the whole description, the discourse, the focus on carbon is disastrous. And net zero is disastrous. And it's been formulated by people who in a certain way are concerned about climate change, but what can't be touched is the direction whereby fewer and fewer global banks and corporations get richer and richer as a structural path, So she's been very aware of that, and she's been also very aware of the role of high technology in hijacking the world and the system. She's been trying to say, we can't eat computer chips. So she's become also quite concerned about agriculture. So in your community, if you say you're working with so many different cultures, how many people are you reaching? Do you know?
Well, I mean, we're near about 10,000 now. We only started last year. So
oh, really? You only started last year?
Yes,
really?
yeah. And I've got,
and how did you start?
I just decided I was just doing lots of I just set up a WhatsApp group, and that grew and grew and grew, and then people said, no, you ought to do your own sort of channel. So I do sort of lectures, and I do things like talks on YouTube, and it's sort of expanding now. So, and I've got a lot of interest now in Bangladesh. So they're in the process of trying to purchase land in Bangladesh to set up their first off-grid self-sustainable community, and then they want me to go over there and help them.
But to what extent is that group Muslim? How much does that relate to Islam?
Yeah, I mean that the whole point is to it's for the Muslim community, but it's there to welcome everybody.
But for instance, if you're reaching mothers in Norway, would they likely be Muslim mothers?
Yeah. Oh, yes, they're all Muslim. Yeah. Although saying that, there are a number of people that have seen my channel who have subscribed who are not religious, but they just have their interest. But although it's aimed at the Muslim world, I always say, look, but it's open to everybody because, so yes, it's first of all, I have 4 sort of principles. One is we need to rewire, to recondition how we see, how we think.
Yeah.
That connects to Ian's work. The next one is then we need to reconnect with nature to connect to our sort of senses, to embed ourselves in what we know is ecological eco-literacy. The third one is to rewild, and then start to redesign and reestablish, like the work that you're doing. So how do we establish the off-grid communities? How do we become self-sustainable? How do we reach out to people from all faiths, all backgrounds, and change the whole system?
Yeah. Well, part of what, I don't know if you've seen, but we also have we feel it's become quite important to encourage people to also, we say, resist and renew, so part of what we're talking about is reconnect, including the inner reconnection, deeper connection to others. And there I feel the Alcoholics Anonymous model of helping people to deeply share from the heart and soul and to be imperfect, to share their fears and their addictions and their, and to be helped to do that, which this project in Dartington, with the prisoners, it's been wonderful to see that, and to help them then to learn to garden, and there's even some pottery, and it's really, but then we also feel that there's a way that people really need to be looking at this bigger picture, to resist and to first of all understand the dominant system, and to understand it in a way that isn't fragmented and therefore doesn't induce too much blame of others or particular corporations or particular governments or self-blame, but just in a clear and calm way, take a deep breath and understand how this progressive removal from nature has been this removal from community. And, very much also with the breakdown of the intergenerational family. It's a very important part of the whole picture, fundamental. But the resistance part, which again, for us, more than anything, is intellectual, is what I'm calling big picture activism. Let's share that understanding to help mobilize and motivate people to move towards creating those really strategic community, localizing projects. It's heartening to know that in Ontario, in Canada, that the government has recently put, it's not a huge amount of money, but $60 million into supporting genuine local security, local food security, to really shorten the distances. And all of that's coming about from pressure from the bottom up to start to change policy.
So a lot of people might say, why is the interest there in the Muslim world to reconnect with nature and to go off-grid? And really that stems from the Prophet saying that in the end of times where it becomes so difficult, which we're experiencing now, he said, the Prophet, the best thing for you is to go to the hillside, to go to the mountains with your goats and your sheep and stay there. So that's what's inspiring so many Muslims around the world to first of all connect with me and to say yes, because there's not many people that are talking about this, and how you're connecting, how you're trying to bring the Quran alive through nature, through off-grid living. And so that's how it's now expanding, and that's why, as well as trying to help the Muslims, I'm trying to reach out, like to you, to sort of say, let's work together, because we're all in this together.
I mean, one thing, what do you say about, the worrying thing is the extent to which some people now are very much joining what they're calling prepping communities, where people are going out and they're building bunkers and they're, preparing for the end of the world. And my, my sense is that we're sort of in this together, and I've always tried to spread the word as widely as possible, to encourage around the world as much as possible the rebuilding of economies and ways of living where we are genuinely more sustainable and reducing our footprint. So I think there's a danger there, isn't there, with some of that thinking, that people would just say, okay, I'm going to go out as far as I can. And I often say that people who did that already in the 70s, many of the hippies were rejecting this fossil fuel-based consumer suburbanized culture. But they didn't learn, what I have concluded, they didn't learn enough from indigenous culture to know that you need a certain number of people to do things, that you need that intergenerational, broader community to raise a healthy child, to build a house, to plant a field, to harvest a field. And when you just go out, a couple of people, and you try to do all these things for yourself, you're not likely to succeed.
And that's my message at the moment is I say, okay, for those individuals or small families that want to go out and isolate themselves, okay, yeah, that's fine. But the majority of Muslims on this planet, it's impossible. So I say, so think about living off grid in the urban, organization. What can you do in your town? What can you do in your city? Can you grow a food forest? Yes, you can. Can you become self-sustainable? Yes. So you can live within the city, you live within the town, but you become self-sufficient.
Yeah. And again, I guess I wouldn't say so much, I've often tried now to say not so much self-sufficient as community sufficient. In other words, linking up to create that, that connection from the seed to the table, and so between the consumer and the farmer, the collaborative structures. I think we share that really it's about understanding the oneness of life and a deep ecological spirituality at the center of it.
So what I'm doing in Bristol is head of chaplaincy. So I have a very large multi-faith team. And so I've just launched this last year. It's a new sort of area of chaplaincy. It's the first prison that's doing this in the whole of the UK, and we call it eco-chaplaincy. So I love it. So now we're reaching out to deliver courses with your Christian, Hindu, Buddhist, Muslim. We're delivering courses on eco-psychology, ecotherapy. So those visitors that have violent thoughts or self-harm, we have beehives, we have a therapy garden, and so I sort of have a course which I then say to my Christian chaplain or my Buddhist or Hindu, now that's the template. Now you can change it and alter it to put your own scripture perspective.
Wonderful.
And then go, so we are the first pilot prison now in the whole of the UK that's now doing that.
Really? And where can I see that written up so we can introduce it to others?
I'll get that sent off to you.
Okay, excellent. How many people have you got helping you to do what you're doing?
So my team, at the moment, I've got full-time chaplains, part-time, and a massive volunteer base. So obviously with COVID, the volunteer base are just coming back. So I've got a team of about just on 20. That's with full-time, part-time, and yeah. And the prisoner uptake, the interest has been amazing.
Has it really, really? Because, you know, one thing that happened with the land work, what's it called, land work, they sometimes, I spoke to some of the prisoners and they were saying a lot of prisoners were very skeptical and didn't want to have anything to do with it, even though they could leave, you know, 6 months before to join this project and learn. But I can imagine, I mean, must be on the increase. And certainly after COVID, you know, there's been this exodus from the city, even in Turkey and India, all over the world, because obviously people realized the pandemic was much more serious in the city where everybody's crowded together, and they realized they wanted healthy, fresh food. And so it gave a big boost to the local food movement. And but do you know that there's huge propaganda for AI? It's one of our biggest concerns. And a lot of people are buying into it. And they believe that, yes, the AI and the app and all of that technology is going to help us.
The other concern is now they're trying to introduce into the cities, they call it vertical farming.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. So you see also, you know, what worries me is that on automatic pilot, without any need for real propaganda, but just the entire direction is towards 100% urbanization, and some rewilding around the edges is okay. There's been much more funding for urban ag, even if it's urban farms, because the whole system isn't threatened by that. But what we've been trying to do, which is to connect the city with the farms around them, to create those local food systems that can really feed the city, which is what they used to do, that gets a lot of resistance. That doesn't get support in the media. And then now, you know, well-intentioned architects who are very ecologically minded are told that we're on such a crowded planet and climate emergency, we're going to have all these people in the city, we've got to go high rise. So also in terms of the buildings for human habitation, even though there's so much evidence of the crime, the depression in these high rise artificial ways of living. So we need a really clear vision that doesn't get too conspiratorial and too sort of kooky, you know, that a lot of the people, you know, now are seeing almost anyone who's associated with the UN or with government as part of this evil conspiracy. And even though, as far as I'm concerned, they're supporting quite an evil system, as individuals, they aren't, and they're not aware of that bigger picture. So I love that you're thinking about that, you know, the mind needing to perceive the bigger picture. So one of the things that I would love to discuss with more philosophically minded people is also what I see as one of the really major problems. And that is that within the confines of the modern worldview, of the modern, the worldview of modernity, people have been led to make no distinction between the world of human creation versus the world, if you like, of God's creation, or whatever we want to call it, the living natural world of which we are a part. That living natural world, the Buddha, in talking about that, was, again, as you were saying, you know, making very clear that every single thing in that living world is interconnected. It's in constant flux and change. And what the Buddha was saying was that if you cling to this a mechanistic compartmentalizing view of the world, you'll be forever dissatisfied. You'll be forever unhappy. And it's once you're able to comprehend and feel this oneness, which is not one thing, but it's this dance of interdependence, then you'll be happy. But many Western Buddhists instead talk about the world and argue that the world, meaning life, is one of constant misery. And that's not what the Buddha was saying. The Buddha was talking about if you have those lenses on that want to hold things still and separate, you'll be forever dissatisfied and unhappy. So it's a relatively simple argument, but I have a very hard time getting most Westerners, well, anybody, to understand what I'm trying to say, which is, I think this is one of the big problems of the modern age, is to get people to recognize this fundamental difference between the acceptance of life as it is, the acceptance that nothing in life is entirely black or white. Everything, it has its own dance. We as limited humans can't condemn one form of life like cockroaches, say we're going to kill them all without suffering the consequences. However, what I see happening is people that wake up to that truth of those spiritual teachings, they then say, oh, I've been taught to accept change. I've been taught to go with this forever changing world. And that means they then sit back and say, yes, Walmart is coming in and destroying every shop in my town. Well, the spiritual teachings say to accept change. Do you see what I'm saying?
Just say, we have very, limited knowledge, same as in Quran. I mean, God says that everything is in praise. Everything is praising me in the world, but you with limited understanding have no understanding. Whether that's through energy and vibration or whatever, but correct. Everything is in that beautiful. Everything is dancing. It's in that beautiful, rhythm. And the more that I study, because there's not many of us around, sadly, from the Islamic perspective, that are absorbed in what we're sort of doing. And that's why I try and say to people, and even when I work with, the extremists, is if you look at the term, as soon as you say the term Sharia law, people get scared. Yeah. What God is saying is, he commands mankind to study the universe, the natural world, to see how perfect it is. It's perfectly ordered. It's in design. It's not in conflict. How then I've designed the universe and creation, then I'm now going to put man on the earth, and I want you to live according to the same universal laws. Then there will be peace.
Yeah. And you see, again, I mean, this was what Ladakh just forced me to see, was that when people live in that embedded, deeply respectful way, things work so much better. It wasn't perfect. But, part of my learning has also been that civilization is the problem, that any civilization, essentially, that we know about was a group of people expanding beyond their boundaries to conquer other people and to become larger than, as it were, their right. So the smaller, peaceful cultures that managed often to survive for thousands of years, we know very little about. And so I'm trying to say also, it wasn't just in prehistory. Like, about Maria Gimbutas and the idea of these goddess-centered cultures, prehistoric goddess-centered cultures, makes sense to me. We don't have all that much evidence, but it all makes sense that there was this, as it were, progression away from settled, peaceful, smaller, very feminine cultures. My sense is that even what I experienced in Ladakh was that in a decentralized, meaning in a way of life where communities depended on nature instead of some central man-made hierarchical structure. When they depended on nature in that way, it always required a group effort and an awareness of interdependence, an awareness of give and take. There were just structural reasons for more cooperative and positive interaction. But when they suddenly pulled, into, well, if you read my book, I've said that I don't know now, with COVID and what's happening, I'm very much hoping to reach more of the groups that have, people who haven't been vaccinated and are taking their children out of school and are trying to build alternative systems. Or is that many people who you appeal to as well?
Yes,
Yeah.
a lot, yes.
A lot, yeah.
And sometimes it creates the friction between the mother that's trying to do that and the husband, and the husband that wants to connect or stay connected with the system.
Yeah, absolutely. That's what I'm seeing too, worldwide. There's a real pattern there, a real gender difference that became very clear. It's always been clear in my work. I mean, even though I was never a feminist, because the feminists, most of them were trying to prove that women were just like men. Whereas this sort of more eco-feminist tradition was saying, no, well, actually, there are significant differences, and, let's celebrate them, and let's live, in harmony, and not try to, but let's ensure that the respect for the feminine is reestablished. And you're saying you are the chaplain of the whole prison.
I'm the head imam, but I'm the chaplaincy manager. So I look after all of the faith leaders. So my responsibility is to, any prisoner has a legal right to practice their faith.
Yeah. So how many faiths have you got in the prison then?
So I have all the denominations of Christians. So I have Church of England, Free Church, Catholic, Hindu, Sikh, Jewish, Muslim, pagan, Rastafarian, Quaker. So I've got about 10.
10. And some of them are calling themselves pagan, are they?
The pagan faith is actually growing.
Is it? That's quite good in a way, I think. I mean, I think that's very much back to nature. But how else, what would you say about the pagan growth? Do you have any, does it worry you, or what do you think?
No, I mean, it was worrying the government some time ago, because they were a bit worried that why have we approved a pagan religion within the prison service?
Yes.
But I've had some very interesting, conversations with my pagan chaplains on, nature and, scripture. But again, the more I learn, I mean, paganism, there's different offshoots. There's, you can go into the sort of darkness of it, or just that connection with, nature.
Yes.
And so, I mean, all of my team are faith leaders in their own right, and my job is just to, and it's to work together in harmony for the goodness of all of the prisoners. So we've got about 600 prisoners.
600 prisoners.
And over 50% every month, which is interesting and staggering. Over 50% are affiliated to a faith, which is interesting.
Over 50%, that is very interesting. Yeah. Over 50% of 600 prisoners affiliated to a faith. And you were saying it's roughly 10 faiths.
There are lots of prisoners that don't have a faith, but it's amazing how many prisoners call out to chaplaincy for that pastoral care, for that help and support. And then we have about 200 staff as well, so we have to help them and support them.
Yeah, 200 staff and 600 prisoners. I mean, I know my husband, who is trained as a barrister, he would be fascinated to talk to you because his mother also did quite a lot of voluntary work in the prison. You have horrible types of injustice in your prison as well?
Yeah, I mean, there's always individuals that you realize that they shouldn't be, be in prison. And then,
Yeah.
of course, you have individuals that have to be in prison. And I've been in the prison system now for about 16 years, but it's changed now because when I went in, the majority of the prison officers were ex-soldiers from Afghanistan. When I started, I was the first. I from the Muslim perspective, I was the first revert white imam in the whole of the country. So for me, it was a tremendous challenge for me, because when they saw me down as Muhammad, as the new imam, they thought I'd be Pakistani or an Arab or an Indian or Bengali.
Yeah, like I did. Yeah.
But suddenly they thought, oh, he's white.
Yeah.
And so I had many challenges, but now it's become very positive now. So,
yeah,
generally prison officers and prisoners, whether they're Muslim or non, they reach out to me because I have that connection, because for 40 years I was a non-Muslim. And all these years, so I can see both sides of the.
Yeah. Are you not under intense pressure for financial cuts and having to cut back? Oh, you are. Yeah. And so, but you are essentially, it's still the government that is in control. It's not becoming corporatized or commercialized yet.
In Bristol, there is a private prison, and there are a number of private prisons in the UK.
Oh.
But the majority of prisons are controlled by the Ministry of Justice.
Okay. And so you personally are not feeling enormous pressures for financial reasons.
Oh, yes,
you're not having enormous.
Yes.
Oh, really?
Yes, yeah. They're reducing all the funding and everything that's available. So you want to do lots of amazing projects, but they say no, there's just no funding. The answer to reducing reoffending and resettlement is about, it's still that philosophy: you must learn maths and you must learn English.
Yeah.
And a prisoner, the majority of prisoners have never been to school. So
really, is that true? I would love to know statistics there, roughly. How many of the prisoners?
They can't read, they can't write, and that the government is trying to force them to sit in a classroom within a prison and read and write, and they're just not interested. So when I go in there from chaplaincy and I say, let me teach you about beekeeping, and through beekeeping I would teach you English, maths and geography. It's amazing.
Yeah. Oh, that's so lovely. And I'm so glad you're allowed to do that, because again, the scary thing is that in this system, everything that requires people, the human eyes and heart and care, is becoming too expensive. So you're going to have, the ratio is more prisoners to fewer guards, more students to fewer teachers, more patients to fewer doctors. And it's just, this is for me why I'm so passionate about trying to get economic literacy out there to prevent this being imprisoned in this poverty of human care. When, if people were allowed the spaciousness, more carers for every sick person, more carers for every mentally ill person, for every prisoner, we would have a completely different world.
Lovely to meet you and to talk to you.
Yeah, really lovely. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.